Welcome to a BG3 Toolkit guide on terrain tools. You can find the primary terrain tools up here at the top bar. Selecting it will open a window and add a bunch of new tools to your toolbar. Let's go through all of that real quickly. First, let's look at the new window that showed up. We can add new terrains with this plus button and save changes with the save option here. Feel free to add multiple terrains in your levels as it is necessary. Laravel does this frequently. You can also resize any terrain with this toolbar button here. Edit Shape Bounce. You can use this to make the terrain the size of the map, or a small chunk of extra detailing like bridges. Now, let's check out the new tools on the toolbar. At the top is the Terrain Painter, which is complicated enough to get its own segment later. The Raise and Lower Terrain does what it says on the tin. Click to raise, right click to lower. Flatten Terrain makes terrain flatten to the height at the center of your tool. Holding left click will continue this height until the button is released. Smooth Terrain tries to smooth slopes and edges into soft slopes, useful for cleaning up your broad strokes. Slopes creates a straight line of terrain from point A to B. This is great for creating paths or blocking out terrain. Cut Terrain puts a hole in your terrain. This is useful for areas of terrain where you need to walk both above and below without separating into a new level. You can find hotkeys for these tools in your preferences. Unlike other hotkeys, you have to hold down to activate the tools. I suggest you use these frequently to add your own. It is also critically important that you're aware that you can right click and edit these brushes. Not only these brush radiuses and strengths here, but also incredibly useful tools such as editing terrains inside the brush instead of only the one you selected, which is perfect for hiding terrain transitions. We need to locate some brushes to paint on our terrain. This is where in the series we introduce the Resource Manager, found here. These are the base resources in the game, and we'll visit this again later. However, right now, click on this icon here, conveniently named Terrain Brushes. Unfortunately, there's no real way we know of to easily preview these terrains. The best tool we have right now is a guide on the modding Discord by a member called Grimscalp, which I'll link in the description. For now, we'll pick out any grass, paving stones, some dirt and some rock brushes. With these selected, we can either click the add button here, or click and drag them into the container here. Let's break down how these brushes works. The base layer is the under texture that covers your entire terrain. The default brush you get has two, which will dynamically change under this arrow here. If we go to the Height tab, we can pretend to understand that as the terrain gets steeper, it transitions between dirt or rock. Think of 1 as vertical and 0 as flat. If you want to, you can mess with this, however manual painting will lead to better results. Close this madness by clicking the arrow again. The important factors, however, are not where the brushes are ordered, but the options down here, which vary depending on the brush. The height map decides what texture takes priority. Two textures can share the same height and overlap and merge. Height offset determines how strongly the terrain eases in and out. A height offset will have a harder edge, whereas 0 will have a very smooth transition. Height contrast determines how low the terrain is allowed to be on its internal height map. This is best viewed with the tiles, where increasing this showcases the grout disappearing and we only get the top of the tiles. Maxing it out only shows the highest tiles. Notice that despite the effect, these textures are geometrically fully flat. Alpha is another word for transparency. Very useful if you want a soft glaze over effect. Note this affects the entire brush, not just where you're painting. Tile scale and detail determines how much of the texture scales before tiling. Typically you don't need to change this, and I can do some final touches. Detail strength only shows up occasionally and determines how much of the secondary texture effect shows. Play with this if it shows up and see if it affects your needs. This tool alone can layer so much detail into your terrain, especially with terrain merging. Once again, as in every tutorial, I strongly suggest visiting the in-game files to see the techniques Laravel uses to make your world look stunning. Now we can texture our terrain. Let's look at a tool called the Instance Painter to decorate our terrain with meshes and objects in a way that's fast, detailed, and most importantly, cheap on your computer. Here to access the Mesh Painter, we can get this mildly overwhelming menu. To get started, just like the Texture Painter, we need to add some brushes. Unfortunately, this is slightly less convenient. Go to the Resource Manager and click Visual and then search IP_. These are models that have been designated to work with the Instance Painter. You can import via this button here. Unlike the Terrain Painter, you cannot click and drag into this box. You must click the button. If you can't see the message you imported, click the Default tab here, opening the folder where hopefully your meshes will be. If you want to organize this, you can right click a selection of meshes and move to a new folder which can be renamed afterwards. You can also remove message you no longer need with this remove button next to it. Once again, we'll go over the tool options. Toggle shadows sounds obvious, but we've yet to find a mesh that actually does do anything to it. If you find a mesh that creates shadows to remove, this probably removes it. Toggle visibility lets you turn off a model from your scene. Toggle area changes your brush from an area effect to a single click, letting you fine-tune placement rather than doing broad strokes. Checkout badges is meant to check out your meshes and save them to a level, however there is no feedback to know if this actually works. Paint instances is your main brush tool. Click to place models, right click to remove them. Align instance, to be honest, we have no idea what it does. We're yet to get it to react to anything, so if you find out, let us know. Update instance updates the meshes in the brush rather than adding new ones, based on the parameters at the bottom, which we'll visit shortly. With these brushes selected, there are two settings that appear below the top bar. Radius affects the brush size, and terrain only ensures you only paint terrain. Turning it off lets you paint on buildings, constructs, models, and other such. These bottom parameters affect how your meshes get placed. Align normal aligns the meshes to follow the normal of the floor. Fancy way to say the model will automatically rotate to match the terrain slope. Flow is your brush strength, between 1 and 100. Know that even at 1 flow, a model will always appear when you click. This setting does not affect removing models. These random rotations will automatically rotate the models for you to help increase visual diversity. For the most part, you will only want rotation Y enabled. Max and min changes how big or small the model can be placed. This further increases visual diversity. Should be kept fairly uniform, whereas sparser detailing can vary wildly. That's all the tools you need for terrain creation. Let's go over some final quick tips. Large objects, such as trees and rocks, should not be terrain or instance meshes, but actual scenery from the root templates. This ensures that they have collision and can be placed precisely to interact with the game world properly, as well as being the best practice. Cliff faces will always look bad if you only use the terrain. Cliff sceneries to give your natural walls visual depth, detail, and reduce texture stretching. Feel free to hide blemishes with these walls and models frequently. Caves should be turned into their own separate scenes unless they are incredibly small. The amount of time and effort required to make a cliff look good from all the required angles is immense. Laren never does this themselves. Once again, in this scenario, scenery is your best friend rather than the terrain tools. Laren also uses landscapes for bridges by simply adding a small bit of terrain over a gap. Because the camera never looks up, this is a clean, interactive, and easy way to create incredibly detailed looking bridges. And that's it for your terrain tools. I'll use this outro to remind you to once again go look at the in-game files. They're right there to look at. If you need to design, modding, or the toolkit and you wouldn't know how something is done, go look, go find it. It's there, everything's there. But until then, I'll see you next time.